a little tired. The late afternoon sun, a weak tea color, barely pierced the office window. Eleanor felt its meager warmth on her cheek, a small comfort against the chill that seemed to emanate from within her. She scrolled through the insurance statements again, the numbers blurring into an indecipherable tangle of zeros and commas. Each line item for home health nursing services was a fresh stab, a reminder of the elaborate deception. The air in the room felt heavy, thick with unspoken truths and the acrid scent of old paper. "Mom, you look a little tired," Sarah said, entering the small office without knocking. She carried 2 steaming mugs. "I made you chamomile. Thought you could use it." Her voice was soft, almost too solicitous, a familiar tone that now grated on Eleanor's nerves. Eleanor didn't look up immediately. The weight of Sarah's gaze felt like a physical pressure. She took a slow, deliberate sip from the offered mug, letting the herbal aroma fill her senses before answering. "Just reviewing some old paperwork, dear." She kept her voice even, a practiced neutrality she'd mastered over weeks of quiet investigation. Her fingers trembled slightly as she set the mug down. Sarah leaned against the doorframe, her posture relaxed, almost too casual. "Everything okay? You've been spending a lot of time in here lately. Are you feeling well?" Concern laced her voice, but Eleanor heard the underlying current of suspicion. The irony was bitter. Sarah, the architect of her suffering, now feigned worry for her health. "Just fine," Eleanor replied, finally meeting her daughter's eyes. They were wide, a shade of blue that once seemed innocent, now held a glint of something sharper, more calculating. "Actually, Sarah, I wanted to talk to you about some of these statements. There are discrepancies I can't quite reconcile." She pushed a stack of papers across the desk, careful to keep her hand steady. Sarah's casual demeanor evaporated. Her eyes flickered from the papers to Eleanor's face, a barely perceptible tightening around her mouth. "What kind of discrepancies, Mom?" Her voice had lost its soft edge, becoming flatter, almost defensive. "These charges for specialized nursing care, for instance," Eleanor began, pointing to a highlighted section. "And the frequency of the visits. According to my doctor, the procedures listed here weren't necessary, nor were they performed." She watched her daughter's face intently, searching for a flicker of guilt, a telltale sign. Sarah walked over to the desk, picking up the statement. Her brow furrowed, a performance of confusion. "Oh, those. Well, Mom, you know how things can get confusing with all the different codes and services. Insurance companies are always trying to complicate things. I was just trying to make sure you got the best possible care, the care you needed." "The care I needed, Sarah, or the care that generated the largest payouts?" Eleanor's voice was quiet, but it resonated with a steeliness that surprised even herself. The truth, once spoken aloud, felt liberating and terrifying all at once. The air in the room crackled with unspoken accusations. Sarah flinched, her facade cracking. Her eyes narrowed. "Mom, what are you implying?" "I'm a nurse. I've dedicated my life to helping people. I would never." "I've contacted the medical board, Sarah," Eleanor interrupted, her voice gaining strength, each word a hammer blow. "And I've spoken with a lawyer. They've confirmed what I suspected. The treatments you billed for, the specialized care you insisted upon, were fabricated. The funds you received from my insurance company were not used for my benefit." The words hung in the air, heavy and irrefutable. A flash of anger, raw and undisguised, crossed Sarah's face. You reported me? To the board? Mom, how could you? I'm your daughter." Her voice rose, a desperate edge creeping in. "Because you defrauded me, Sarah," Eleanor stated plainly, the pain in her voice mingling with a newfound resolve. "You used my illness, my trust, to enrich yourself. I don't know what drove you to do this, but it was wrong. Deeply, fundamentally wrong." Sarah's chest heaved. She looked around the small office, as if searching for an escape route. Her anger morphed into something closer to panic. This is a mistake, Mom. A misunderstanding. I can explain everything. Please, just let me explain. She took a step towards Eleanor, her hand outstretched. Eleanor recoiled, a small, involuntary movement. There's nothing to explain, Sarah. The evidence is clear. The board will investigate, and the law will take its course. I just hope you realize the gravity of what you've done. The sun had finally dipped below the horizon, casting long, purple shadows across the room. The air grew colder, and Eleanor shivered, but not from the chill. It was the shiver of a woman who had finally found her voice, even if it meant shattering her own world. But, the money, Sarah stammered, her voice barely a whisper. What about the money? You'll ruin me. This will destroy my career. Eleanor met her gaze, her own eyes filled with a profound sorrow. The money, Sarah, will be recovered. And it will be used to help others who have been taken advantage of. To prevent this from happening to anyone else. She paused, her voice thick with emotion. I'm starting a nonprofit. A healthcare advocacy group. It's the only good I can see coming out of this. Sarah stared at her, her face a mask of disbelief and dawning horror. The betrayal in her eyes was now mixed with fear, a raw, primal fear. The chamomile tea sat untouched, cooling on the desk, a silent witness to the unraveling of a family. Eleanor felt a crushing exhaustion, a weariness that went bone deep, but beneath it, a tiny flicker of hope, a fragile beginning. The special clinic. The stale aroma of antiseptic and aged paper hung heavily, a stark contrast to the bright, welcoming clinics Eleanor typically frequented. The special clinic, as it was vaguely dubbed, occupied a discreet suite in a time-worn downtown medical building, far from the gleaming new facilities Sarah had always championed. Eleanor's knuckles whitened around her worn handbag, the plastic folder holding her daughter's fabricated medical records feeling impossibly heavy. Her appointment was with Dr. Eris Thorne, a name her lawyer had specifically recommended, a specialist in unraveling medical fraud. A gaunt, weary receptionist, her name tag identifying her as Brenda, looked up from her screen. Eleanor Vance? Dr. Thorne will see you now. Eleanor rose, her knees protesting with a soft creak. The narrow corridor was lined with closed doors, revealing nothing of their hidden purposes. Dr. Thorne's office was surprisingly austere, a metal desk, 2 utilitarian chairs, and a formidable wall of filing cabinets. He was a man in his late 40s, his kind yet keenly observant gaze seeming to absorb every detail. Dark hair, threaded with silver, framed his face, and his crisp white lab coat bore the subtle creases of extended hours. Mrs. Vance, thank you for coming in, Dr. Thorne greeted, gesturing to the chair opposite his desk. His voice was a calm, professional baritone. I've reviewed the documents your lawyer provided. It's a comprehensive, if deeply troubling, compilation. Eleanor settled, her eyes fixed on the doctor. Troubling doesn't even begin to capture it, Dr. Thorne. My own daughter, she trailed off, the sting of betrayal still vivid. I understand this is incredibly difficult, he acknowledged, his expression softening with empathy. My objective is to reconstruct the full scope of the deception, to identify its patterns, and to ensure that no other patients have endured similar schemes. He leaned forward, hands clasped, resting on the desk. Tell me, Mrs. Vance, from your perspective, when did you first suspect something was amiss? Eleanor recounted the unfolding nightmare, Sarah's initial insistence on a new round of experimental treatments for non-existent ailments, the escalating bills, the elusive explanations, and finally, the undeniable evidence from the insurance company. As she spoke, Dr. Thorne listened with unwavering attention, occasionally jotting notes in a small, leather-bound notebook. The sheer gall, the meticulousness of the falsified reports, Eleanor said, her voice tight with a blend of fury and lingering disbelief. It wasn't just a few made-up appointments. It was an entire, meticulously constructed medical history. Dr. Thorne nodded. Indeed. We encounter varying levels of sophistication in these cases. What you presented points to a deliberate, organized scheme. The involvement of a nurse, with access to medical coding and patient records, makes it particularly egregious. He paused, then continued, Your lawyer mentioned you've already filed a report with the medical board. That was an excellent initial step. I am resolved to see this through, Eleanor asserted, her determination hardening. Not just for the financial recovery, though that's important. But for the principle. For all those who might be vulnerable to this kind of deception. Dr. Thorne regarded her with newfound respect. That's precisely the commitment we need. Your recovered funds, once secured, could be instrumental in establishing the advocacy group you've envisioned. We often find that victims of medical fraud, once healed, become the most effective champions for change. He retrieved a thick file from his cabinet. Based on the information you've provided, Mrs. Vance, I've already initiated some preliminary cross-referencing. Sarah Vance's name has appeared in a few other discrepancies. Nothing as clear-cut as your case, but sufficient to warrant deeper investigation. Eleanor felt a sudden chill. Other discrepancies? You mean, other victims? Potentially, Dr. Thorne confirmed, his voice grave. It's too early to say for certain. But the pattern of specific treatments, the billing codes, even the names of some of the consulting specialists listed in your records, are surfacing elsewhere. Minor inconsistencies, easily overlooked without a catalyst like your case. He opened the file, revealing a series of printed reports. For instance, a patient named Mr. Robert Jenkins. A widower, no close family. His insurance claimed he underwent an extensive, long-term physical therapy regimen for a chronic spinal condition, a condition his primary physician insists he never had. Eleanor felt a wave of nausea. Sarah worked at his assisted living facility for a few months last year. She mentioned him once, said he was a sweet old man who needed a lot of care. The words now took on a sinister, new meaning. Precisely, Dr. Thorne said, his gaze fixed on her. And the billing codes for Mr. Jenkins's treatments bear a striking resemblance to some of the codes used in your own fabricated bills. It appears your daughter may have been operating on a much larger scale than initially thought, targeting vulnerable individuals who might not possess the resources or the clarity of mind to question suspicious charges. The room seemed to constrict around Eleanor. Her personal heartbreak was morphing into something far more chilling, a systematic exploitation orchestrated by her own child. The anger, the grief, now intermingled with a growing sense of urgency. This wasn't just about her anymore. This was about Mr. Jenkins, and possibly countless others. Her advocacy group, once a vague aspiration, now felt like an imperative. The battle against Sarah was merely the beginning. The true fight was for justice. Signs of success? The crisp morning air bit at Eleanor's cheeks as she stepped out of the courthouse, a stark contrast to the sterile, climate-controlled halls she'd just left. The sun, a pale winter disk, offered little warmth but painted the urban landscape in sharp relief. Next to her, Dr. Thorne adjusted his wire-rimmed glasses, a faint smile playing on his lips. A good day's work, Mrs. Vance, he said, his voice a low rumble. The preliminary injunction has been granted. Sarah's assets are frozen, and the clinic's operations are under immediate review. Eleanor felt a fragile sense of relief unfurl in her chest, like a tight knot slowly loosening. It wasn't triumph, not yet, but a significant step. And Mr. Jenkins, she asked, her voice raspy from the emotional strain. His case is also moving forward, Thorne confirmed, pulling a small, leather-bound notebook from his inside pocket. The evidence you provided regarding the fabricated treatment protocols for hypersensitive dermal vasculitis was damning. It connected directly to the billing records we'd already flagged. The board is taking this very seriously. He paused, his gaze sweeping over the bustling street. This isn't just about the money, Eleanor. It's about a profound breach of trust, a systematic exploitation of vulnerability. Eleanor nodded, the weight of his words pressing down on her. The betrayal still felt like a raw wound, but the fight for justice was a powerful balm. What's the next step for us? My team will continue to sift through the clinic's financial records, Thorne explained. We're looking for other patterns, other patients. Given the sophistication of Sarah's scheme, it's highly probable there are more victims. He hailed a passing taxi. I'll be in touch by the end of the week. Try to get some rest, Mrs. Vance. This is far from over. As the taxi pulled away, Eleanor stood for a moment, the chill wind whipping stray hairs across her face. The legal wheels were turning, and a quiet sense of momentum was building. She felt a flicker of hope, a fragile seed beginning to sprout in the barren landscape of her grief. Later that afternoon, back in the quiet sanctuary of her home, Eleanor sat at her kitchen table, a steaming mug of herbal tea cradled in her hands. The silence, once a comfort, now felt heavy, punctuated only by the occasional creak of the old house. She pulled out a notepad and pen, a habit she'd cultivated during her years as an elementary school teacher. Today, though, her notes weren't lesson plans. She started listing names: Sarah, Mr. Jenkins, Dr. Thorne. Then she began to brainstorm: healthcare advocacy? Patient rights? The ideas were nebulous, undefined, but a powerful urge was growing within her. She wanted to prevent this from happening to anyone else. Sarah's fraud had exposed a gaping vulnerability in the system, a chasm where trust was easily exploited. Her phone buzzed, startling her. It was a message from her neighbor, Mrs. Gable, a kindly woman who often checked in. Thinking of you, dear. Saw the news about the clinic. Hope you're doing okay. Eleanor paused, her thumb hovering over the reply button. The news, it hadn't been public yet, had it? She quickly searched online. A local news outlet had a small blurb, citing an ongoing investigation into a local medical facility for suspected fraudulent billing practices. No names were mentioned, but the timing was clear. The first ripples of exposure were spreading. A knot tightened in her stomach. Sarah would know. The realization was stark, cold. Her daughter would undoubtedly understand the implications of frozen assets and a suspended clinic. What would her reaction be? Anger? Panic? Eleanor braced herself, a new kind of dread mixing with the fragile hope she'd felt earlier. The front door chime suddenly resonated through the house, a short, insistent burst. Eleanor's breath hitched. Her heart pounded, a frantic drumbeat against her ribs. She hadn't ordered anything, wasn't expecting anyone. With a cautious tread, she moved towards the entryway, peering through the peephole. Standing on her porch, her face pale and drawn, was Sarah. Her usually perfectly styled hair was disheveled, and her expensive coat was clutched tightly around her. Her eyes, usually so calculating, were wide with a raw, desperate fury that Eleanor had never seen before. Sarah's hand was raised, ready to ring the chime again, her knuckles white. The quiet peace of the afternoon shattered. The fight had truly begun. A troubling discovery. The scent of Eleanor's jasmine tea, usually a calming presence, now felt acrid in the air, mingling with the metallic tang of Sarah's barely suppressed rage. You did what? Sarah's voice, though low, vibrated with a dangerous intensity that rattled the antique teacups on the mantel. Her eyes, usually a soft hazel, were now hard chips of jade. Eleanor gripped her mug, the warmth a small comfort against the chill seeping from her daughter's presence. The injunction prevents you from operating your clinic, Sarah. It's a temporary measure. She tried to inject a note of calm into her voice, but it felt thin and reedy even to her own ears. Until the investigation can conclude. Investigation? Sarah scoffed, a bitter laugh escaping her lips. This isn't an investigation, Mother. This is an attack. My life, my career, everything I've built, you're trying to destroy it. She paced across the plush Persian rug, her movements sharp and agitated. Do you have any idea what this means? My patients, your fabricated protocols, Sarah, your fraudulent billing practices, Eleanor cut in, her resolve hardening. That's what this means. Dr. Thorne and I have enough evidence to prove it. Sarah stopped, her back to Eleanor, shoulders rigid. A tremor ran through her. Evidence? You think you have evidence? What about the good I've done? The people I've helped? She spun around, her face contorted. This is about you, isn't it? Always about you. You want to control me, just like you always have. The accusation stung, a raw wound reopened. This is about justice, Sarah. And about the truth. Eleanor watched as Sarah's expression shifted, the fury slowly draining, replaced by a desperate, almost pleading look that Eleanor recognized from her daughter's troubled teenage years. Please, Mother, Sarah whispered, her voice cracking. Don't do this. I can fix this. I can explain. Just, let me fix it. Tears welled in her eyes, making them glisten like polished stones. Eleanor's heart ached, a familiar maternal pang, but she forced herself to remember the cold, calculated deceit she had uncovered. It's too late for that, Sarah. Sarah fled, the slam of the front door echoing through the quiet house, leaving Eleanor with the lingering scent of despair and the unsettling certainty that the fight had only just begun. The phone rang, pulling Eleanor from her uneasy reverie. It was Dr. Thorne, his voice edged with urgency. Eleanor, I've been reviewing the patient files from Sarah's clinic that the court seized. There's something deeply disturbing here. I think you need to come down to my office. Driven by a renewed sense of purpose, Eleanor arrived at Dr. Thorne's office, the sterile scent of antiseptic and old paper filling her nostrils. The doctor, his usually composed demeanor frayed, gestured to a stack of files piled high on his desk. These are patient records from Sarah's clinic. I've cross-referenced them with the insurance claims. He pushed a folder across the desk. Look at this one. Mrs. Albright. Diagnosed with a rare autoimmune disorder. Sarah prescribed a cocktail of highly experimental, incredibly expensive treatments. Eleanor opened the folder, her gaze drawn to the detailed treatment plan. But these protocols, they're not recognized by any major medical board. And the costs are astronomical. Exactly, Dr. Thorne affirmed, his voice grim. Now, look at her medical history. He pointed to an earlier diagnosis. Mrs. Albright's original diagnosis was a relatively common, treatable condition. Not life-threatening. Sarah re-diagnosed her, claiming the initial assessment was flawed. A cold knot formed in Eleanor's stomach. So, Sarah not only prescribed unnecessary and proven treatments, but she also misdiagnosed patients to justify them? It gets worse, Dr. Thorne continued, his voice barely above a whisper. I found several other cases. Similar patterns of re-diagnosis, followed by these exorbitant, unapproved treatments. And in almost every one, the patient's condition actually deteriorated under Sarah's care. He tapped a particular entry. Mrs. Albright, for instance. Her family reported severe side effects, worsening symptoms. She ended up seeking treatment from another specialist, who quickly corrected the misdiagnosis and put her on standard, effective medication. Eleanor felt a wave of nausea. Her daughter hadn't just defrauded insurance companies, she had actively endangered lives. The image of Sarah's tear-streaked face at her door earlier that day flashed in her mind, now tainted with a chilling hypocrisy. This wasn't merely about financial misconduct, it was about a profound betrayal of trust, a reckless disregard for human well-being. The preliminary injunction, while a victory, now felt like a mere tremor before an impending earthquake. Sarah's actions were far more insidious than Eleanor had ever imagined. The healthcare advocacy nonprofit she'd vaguely envisioned suddenly solidified into a concrete, urgent necessity. Unveiling the lies. The scent of stale coffee and disinfectant clung to Dr. Thorne's office, a fitting backdrop for the grim reality unfolding before Eleanor. He laid out a series of medical records, each file a chilling testament to Sarah's depravity. These are the initial findings, Eleanor. It's far worse than we imagined. Eleanor's gaze swept over the names, a pang of recognition hitting her with Mrs. Gable's file. Mrs. Gable, a kindly woman from her book club, had confided in Eleanor about her mysterious new autoimmune disorder and the groundbreaking treatment Sarah was providing. Now, Eleanor's stomach churned. Mrs. Gable, she was one of Sarah's patients. Dr. Thorne nodded, his expression grave. Indeed. We found a consistent pattern. Sarah diagnosed these patients with rare, complex conditions that, upon re-evaluation, they simply don't have. And the treatments she administered, they weren't just unapproved, Eleanor. Some were actively detrimental. He tapped a finger on a highlighted section. Look here. Mrs. Gable's original blood work showed elevated inflammatory markers, but nothing indicative of a full-blown autoimmune crisis. Sarah then prescribed a regimen of high-dose corticosteroids and experimental immune suppressants. These drugs, in a patient without the underlying condition, can severely weaken the immune system, making them susceptible to opportunistic infections and other complications. Eleanor picked up a glossy photograph of a microscopic slide. What is this? Sarah claimed it was a novel pathogen, unique to Mrs. Gable's rare disease. Our lab found it to be a common, harmless bacterium, likely introduced deliberately into the sample. Dr. Thorne's voice was low, laced with disgust. She wasn't just fabricating conditions, she was fabricating evidence to support her claims, then making her patients sicker to justify continued, expensive treatment. A cold dread seeped into Eleanor's bones, replacing the earlier shock with a terrifying clarity. This wasn't just about money, it was about power, control, and a malicious disregard for human life. Her daughter, the child she had raised, was a monster. So, she wasn't just letting them get worse, she was actively causing their deterioration. In some cases, yes. The evidence suggests a deliberate pattern of inducing symptoms or exacerbating existing minor issues to fit her fraudulent diagnoses. It ensured her patients remained dependent on her care and continued to pay for her fabricated protocols. Dr. Thorne pushed a stack of legal documents across the desk. I've already alerted the medical board and the district attorney's office. This goes beyond medical malpractice, it's criminal battery, at the very least. Eleanor felt a wave of nausea. The air in the room grew heavy, suffocating. She remembered Sarah's fervent belief in alternative medicine, her dismissive attitude towards traditional medical practices. She'd dismissed it as youthful idealism, a desire to innovate. Now, it was clear it was a carefully constructed facade for a terrifying criminal enterprise. We need to reach out to these patients, Eleanor, Dr. Thorne continued, breaking her trance. They need to know the truth, and they need proper medical care immediately to undo the damage Sarah caused. Eleanor stared at the files, at the names of innocent people who had put their trust in her daughter. A fierce protectiveness bloomed in her chest, not for Sarah, but for Sarah's victims. Yes. Every single one. We have to make sure they get justice, not just financial restitution, but proper care, real healing. Her voice, though quiet, was firm, imbued with a resolve that felt both terrifying and empowering. The path ahead was clear, though fraught with pain. She had to dismantle everything Sarah had built, brick by fraudulent brick. The next few weeks were a blur of meetings with lawyers, investigators, and, most painfully, the victims themselves. Each testimony was a fresh wound, a new layer of betrayal. One patient, a vibrant young woman named Emily, tearfully recounted how Sarah had convinced her she had a rare neurological disorder, leading her to quit her job and isolate herself, convinced she was slowly dying. In reality, Emily had been suffering from severe anxiety, exacerbated by the very medication Sarah had prescribed. Another, an elderly gentleman, had undergone experimental infusions for a non-existent cancer, leaving him weak and financially devastated. Eleanor listened, her heart breaking with each story, yet her resolve only hardened. She found herself poring over medical texts, learning about the very conditions Sarah had fabricated, becoming an accidental expert in rare diseases. She felt a profound responsibility, a maternal instinct rechanneled from protecting her daughter to protecting those her daughter had harmed. The weight of her daughter's crimes was immense, but it also fueled her, forging her into an unexpected, unyielding advocate. She would not rest until every lie was unveiled, every victim heard, and every wrong righted. Gathering the proof. The fluorescent lights of Dr. Thorne's office hummed, casting a sterile glow on the stack of patient files. Eleanor sat opposite him, a knot of dread tightening in her stomach with each new revelation. "It's worse than I imagined," she murmured, her voice barely a whisper. The initial shock had given way to a cold, hard anger, settling deep in her bones. Sarah wasn't just misguided, she was a predator. "We have to be meticulous," Dr. Thorne said, his brow furrowed with concentration as he pointed to a detailed flowchart. "Every prescription, every lab result, every bill. We need to build an unassailable case." Their first target was Mrs. Gable. Eleanor remembered the older woman, frail and constantly complaining of a mysterious tremor. Sarah had attributed it to a rare neurological disorder, prescribing a cocktail of experimental drugs. Now, reviewing Mrs. Gable's original medical records, Eleanor saw the stark contrast. Before Sarah's intervention, Mrs. Gable had been a vibrant, if slightly forgetful, septuagenarian. The tremors, the chronic fatigue, the inexplicable rashes, all had manifested after Sarah's involvement. "Look at this," Dr. Thorne indicated a series of blood tests. Elevated heavy metal levels. Not enough to be lethal, but certainly enough to cause neurological symptoms. And these experimental drugs Sarah prescribed? Many of them have heavy metals as excipients, or worse, can exacerbate their absorption. Eleanor's stomach churned. Sarah wasn't just fabricating illnesses, she was inducing them. "She poisoned them," Eleanor breathed, the words tasting like ash. "Indirectly, perhaps. But yes, the result is the same," Dr. Thorne confirmed, his gaze grim. "We need to trace the supply chain for these medications, cross-reference them with Sarah's dispensing records, and then link them to the onset of symptoms in each patient." The task was monumental. They worked through the day, fueled by lukewarm coffee and an unwavering resolve. Eleanor, once a meticulous bookkeeper for her late husband's hardware store, found a grim satisfaction in the detailed analysis. She sorted through insurance claims, noting the exorbitant costs for rare disease diagnoses and treatments. Each inflated bill was a stab to her heart, a testament to Sarah's ruthless greed. "Here's something," Eleanor announced, pushing a stack of invoices across the table. "These are for a specialized neurological imaging center. Sarah billed the insurance for these scans, but the images themselves are different. Not consistent with Mrs. Gable's age or medical history." Dr. Thorne took the files, his eyes narrowing. "Ghost scans," he murmured. "She likely submitted images from other patients, or even fabricated them entirely, to support her false diagnoses." As the hours bled into evening, the office became a war room. Charts covered the walls, connecting patients to fabricated conditions, to questionable treatments, to skyrocketing bills. The sheer audacity of Sarah's scheme was breathtaking. She hadn't just defrauded, she had tormented. Dr. Thorne, a man typically composed, began to show the strain. His shoulders were hunched, and he rubbed his temples frequently. "We need a secure way to store all this," he said, gesturing to the mounting piles of evidence. "And we need more hands. Legitimate, trustworthy hands." Eleanor nodded, her mind already racing. My old colleague, Margaret. She was always meticulous with accounts, and discreet. I trust her implicitly. Their conversation shifted to the legal strategy. The medical board will be our first step, Dr. Thorne explained. They have the power to revoke her license and launch a formal investigation. But the criminal charges will come from the state prosecutor's office. Fraud, assault, perhaps even attempted murder depending on the severity of the harm. Eleanor flinched at the word murder, but she didn't deny it. The thought of Sarah, her own daughter, standing trial for such heinous acts, sent a chill through her. Yet, the image of Mrs. Gable, trembling and confused, solidified her resolve. Justice had to prevail. The next morning, Eleanor contacted Margaret. Her friend, initially shocked by Eleanor's terse explanation, quickly agreed to help. Margaret arrived with a laptop and an external hard drive, her calm demeanor a welcome presence amidst the mounting tension. Together, they began digitizing the evidence, creating redundant backups and a secure, encrypted database. As Eleanor input patient names and corresponding fabricated diagnoses, she felt a profound sense of purpose. This wasn't just about Sarah anymore, it was about every unsuspecting patient, every family struggling with mounting medical debt, every life irrevocably altered by a predator in a white coat. The proof they were gathering wasn't just for a legal case, it was for a reckoning. And Eleanor, the grieving mother turned unwavering advocate, would see it through. The confrontation. The air in the sterile conference room felt thin, each breath a struggle against the weight of the moment. Eleanor sat across a polished mahogany table from Sarah, whose carefully composed facade wavered under the fluorescent lights. Dr. Thorne was a silent, imposing figure beside Eleanor, his presence a shield. Margaret, her fingers flying across a laptop keyboard, projected a torrent of data onto a screen behind them, a damning, irrefutable tapestry of deceit. Sarah, Eleanor began, her voice a low thrum of controlled fury, we know. Sarah's eyes, usually sharp and calculating, flickered. Know what, Mother? That you've finally lost your mind? This charade is humiliating. She gestured dismissively at the screen. What is all this nonsense? Nonsense? Dr. Thorne interjected, his voice a low growl. It's called evidence, Ms. Caldwell. Evidence of medical fraud, patient endangerment, and battery. He pointed to a graph charting Mrs. Gable's declining health against the supposed experimental treatments Sarah had administered. Mrs. Gable's heavy metal levels spiked after each of your ghost scans. We have the lab reports, the pharmacy records showing your specific orders for these compounds, and the imaging reports, or lack thereof, for your fabricated scans. Sarah's composure cracked. A vein pulsed in her temple. You're accusing me of poisoning patients? That's absurd. I'm a healer, not some monster. Her voice rose, a desperate edge creeping in. Mother, you can't believe this. They're trying to ruin me. Eleanor leaned forward, her gaze unwavering. Sarah, I saw the invoices. The insurance claims. The patient files you doctored. Margaret has cross-referenced every single one with the actual hospital records. There are no records for your treatments, no evidence of the cutting-edge equipment you claim to use. Just your signature on the fraudulent paperwork, and a trail of sicker patients. Margaret clicked a button, and a new slide appeared, a digitized copy of Sarah's personal bank statements, juxtaposed with the dates of the fraudulent insurance payouts. The correlation was sickeningly clear. Large sums of money, coinciding with the fabricated treatments, flowed directly into Sarah's accounts. Sarah's face, usually so pristine, contorted with a mixture of fear and rage. This is a setup. You're trying to destroy my career, my life. Because you're jealous of my success, aren't you? You always were. You never thought I was good enough. The accusation hung in the air, a familiar dart from Sarah's arsenal. But this time it held no power over Eleanor. The pain of the betrayal had cauterized the old wounds. This isn't about me, Sarah. This is about Mrs. Gable. About Mr. Henderson. About all the innocent people you exploited for profit. You didn't just take their money, you took their health, their trust, their hope. I was helping them. Sarah shrieked, slamming her hand on the table. These people needed alternative treatments. The medical establishment is too rigid, too slow. I was innovating. Dr. Thorne scoffed. Innovating by inducing heavy metal poisoning? By billing for services never rendered? That's not innovation, Miss Caldwell. That's criminal negligence and assault. He reached into a briefcase and pulled out a thick folder. We've already presented this evidence to the medical board. Your license is under immediate review. And the district attorney's office has expressed a keen interest in pursuing criminal charges. Sarah went pale, her eyes darting between Eleanor and Dr. Thorne, then to the damning evidence on the screen. The bluster drained from her, replaced by a raw, primal fear. No, you can't. Mother, please. Don't let them do this. I'll pay back the money. I'll stop. Just don't let them take everything. Eleanor felt a pang, a residual echo of the mother who had once defended her daughter fiercely. But it was quickly overshadowed by the faces of the victims, the suffering Sarah had inflicted. It's too late for that, Sarah. Your actions have consequences far beyond money. You hurt people. Deeply. And you're going to be held accountable. Sarah's eyes welled with tears, but Eleanor saw no genuine remorse, only self-pity and terror. I just wanted to be successful, Mother. To make you proud. You never understood the pressure. Success built on the suffering of others is not success, Sarah, Eleanor stated, her voice devoid of emotion. It's a house of cards, and it's about to collapse. The room fell silent, save for the hum of the projector and Margaret's soft clicks. The confrontation was over. The battle for Sarah's soul, if it had ever truly been waged, was lost. Now, only the relentless march toward justice remained. Justice served. The crisp autumn air, usually a balm, felt like a biting indictment as Eleanor stepped out of the district attorney's office. The scent of fallen leaves, typically a comfort, now carried a subtle, acrid undertone, like burning evidence. Beside her, Dr. Thorne's usual stoicism was etched with a quiet gravity, and Margaret, her hand firmly on Eleanor's arm, offered a silent wellspring of strength. The meeting had been exhaustive, a meticulous dissection of Sarah's crimes, and the weight of the coming legal battle pressed down on them all. They're moving quickly, Dr. Thorne stated, his voice a low rumble. The evidence of heavy metal poisoning, coupled with the fabricated billing and the sheer volume of affected patients, it's a strong case. Eleanor nodded, her throat tight. The sheer scale of Sarah's deception, revealed through Margaret's tireless data analysis, was staggering. Dozens of patients, not just Eleanor, had been subjected to the same insidious fraud, their health compromised, their trust shattered. The realization had deepened Eleanor's resolve, transforming her personal vendetta into a broader fight for justice. The DA believes the grand jury will hand down an indictment within the next week, Margaret added, her voice clear and steady despite the grim subject. The preliminary injunction against Sarah's assets is already in motion, and the medical board has officially suspended her license. Eleanor closed her eyes for a brief moment, picturing Sarah's face in their last confrontation, twisted with a desperate, almost feral defiance. The memory was a fresh wound, but it also fueled her determination. This wasn't about revenge, it was about accountability, about ensuring no one else fell victim to such a calculated betrayal. The following days were a whirlwind of activity. Eleanor found herself navigating the labyrinthine corridors of legal proceedings, giving depositions, reviewing patient testimonies, and consulting with the prosecution team. Each new piece of evidence, each new victim's story, cemented her conviction that she was doing the right thing. The initial shock and grief had slowly receded, replaced by a steely resolve. One afternoon, a terse phone call from Sarah's lawyer shattered the fragile peace. "Ms. Vance, my client is prepared to offer a plea bargain," the voice on the other end stated, devoid of inflection. "Full restitution for you and a handful of other patients, in exchange for a significantly reduced sentence. Perhaps even probation." Eleanor's grip tightened on the phone. Her initial impulse was a visceral rejection, a surge of righteous anger. "Is she admitting guilt?" Eleanor asked, her voice surprisingly steady. "She's acknowledging certain procedural irregularities," the lawyer hedged. "And her willingness to make amends." "Procedural irregularities?" Eleanor scoffed. "She poisoned people. She stole their money. She betrayed their trust. Tell your client that there will be no plea bargain. She will face the full weight of the law, and I will be there to see it through." She hung up, her heart pounding, but a sense of fierce satisfaction bloomed within her. This wasn't just about money, it was about justice, about truth. The day of the grand jury hearing arrived with a heavy, gray sky. Eleanor, Dr. Thorne, and Margaret sat together in the sterile waiting room, a silent pact of support binding them. When the news finally came, delivered by a solemn prosecutor, it was both expected and profoundly impactful. "The grand jury has returned a true bill," he announced, his voice echoing slightly in the quiet room. "Sarah Vance has been formally indicted on multiple counts of medical fraud, battery, and reckless endangerment." A collective sigh of relief, subtle yet palpable, escaped the trio. It was a victory, a significant step forward, but Eleanor knew the hardest part was yet to come. The trial would be grueling, a public airing of her family's most painful secrets. But as she looked at Dr. Thorne, whose quiet strength had been unwavering, and Margaret, whose meticulous work had made it all possible, she knew she wasn't alone. Justice, though slow and arduous, was finally being served. The acrid scent of deceit was slowly being replaced by the faint, clean smell of hope. A new beginning, helping hands. The scent of freshly brewed coffee filled Eleanor's kitchen, a comforting counterpoint to the stack of legal documents spread across the worn oak table. Sunlight streamed through the window, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air, but her focus remained on the grim reality laid bare in black and white. Sarah's indictment, while a victory, was merely the first volley in a protracted war. She ran a hand through her silver hair, the familiar ache in her chest a constant companion. "More coffee, Eleanor?" Margaret's voice was gentle, her presence a steady anchor. She slid a steaming mug across the table, its warmth seeping into Eleanor's chilled fingers. Eleanor nodded, grateful. "Thank you, Margaret. It feels endless. The sheer scale of it all. Dozens of patients, all unknowingly poisoned, all financially exploited." She gestured to a spreadsheet listing names and fabricated diagnoses. "We're talking about lives irrevocably altered." Dr. Thorne, perched on a stool at the counter, cleared his throat. "Which brings us to our next phase. The legal battle for Sarah is one thing, Eleanor, but the broader issue of systemic abuse needs addressing. We have a unique opportunity here, given your personal connection and the weight of evidence we've amassed." Eleanor looked from Margaret's empathetic gaze to Dr. Thorne's serious expression. "You're talking about more than just Sarah's prosecution, aren't you?" "Much more," Margaret confirmed. "This isn't just about one bad actor. It's about a system that allowed her to thrive, to inflict such damage. The medical board, the insurance companies, there are gaps, vulnerabilities. We can't just put Sarah behind bars and pretend the problem is solved." A flicker of an idea, born from weeks of quiet contemplation, ignited within Eleanor. What if we could create something, then? A resource. A place where victims of medical fraud and malpractice could find support, legal guidance, and most importantly, a voice? The words, once nebulous, now coalesced into a tangible vision. Dr. Thorne's eyes gleamed. A healthcare advocacy organization. A way to channel this tragedy into positive change. Exactly, Eleanor said, a surge of purpose replacing the dull ache of despair. We have the evidence, the legal counsel, the medical expertise. We have the stories of those Sarah harmed. We can't bring back what they lost, but we can fight for their justice, and prevent it from happening to others. Margaret reached across the table, placing a reassuring hand over Eleanor's. It's a huge undertaking, Eleanor. Are you sure you're ready for this, on top of everything else? Eleanor met her gaze, a new resolve hardening her features. I have to be. For Sarah's victims. For myself. This can't just be about my daughter's crimes, it has to be about healing the wounds she inflicted and preventing future ones. The following weeks transformed Eleanor's life into a whirlwind of meetings, research, and planning. The initial hurdle was finding a suitable location. They needed a space that felt safe, welcoming, and accessible. Eleanor, armed with a newfound determination, scoured rental listings, her vision for the nascent organization growing clearer with each passing day. One afternoon, a small, unassuming office suite caught her eye. It was on the ground floor of a converted brick building, away from the bustling downtown but still easily reachable by public transport. The large bay window offered a view of a tranquil community garden, promising a sense of calm. The rent was steep, but Eleanor, having recovered the bulk of her stolen insurance funds, now had the financial means to invest. This wasn't just an office, it was the birthplace of a mission. Meanwhile, Dr. Thorne leveraged his extensive network, connecting Eleanor with sympathetic legal professionals, medical ethicists, and even a retired investigative journalist eager to lend her skills to expose systemic issues. Margaret, with her innate organizational prowess, began drafting bylaws, developing outreach strategies, and creating a framework for client intake. The first official board meeting, held in Eleanor's now cluttered living room, was a vibrant affair. The air crackled with energy as potential board members, a diverse group of passionate individuals, discussed the scope, mission, and name of their new endeavor. We need something that embodies hope, resilience, and action, one lawyer offered. And speaks to the victims, added a former patient advocate. Eleanor listened, absorbing the ideas, the collective passion a balm to her weary soul. Finally, she spoke, her voice clear and strong. How about the beacon of justice? A hush fell over the room, followed by murmurs of approval. The name resonated, a promise of light in the darkness, a guiding force for those lost in the labyrinth of medical deceit. The groundwork was laid. The legal battles for Sarah were still looming, a dark cloud on the horizon, but Eleanor now had a different fight to wage, one that offered not just justice, but also the promise of a better future. The beacon of justice was born, ready to shine. Advocate for all. The office's fluorescent hum, a stark departure from the quiet dignity Eleanor envisioned for the beacon of justice, mingled with the sense of fresh paint and brewing coffee. Margaret, ever the pragmatist, was already immersed in categorizing case files, her silver hair neatly confined. Across the room, Dr. Thorne hunched over his laptop, a deep furrow in his brow as he dissected medical records. Eleanor observed them, a familiar ache in her chest, a constant echo of her journey to this moment. Sarah's trial loomed months away, its immense weight and the relentless media scrutiny a pervasive burden. Yet, watching the focused industry around her, a fragile ember of hope flickered to life. Morning, team, Eleanor greeted, her voice a strained attempt to mask weariness as she laid a stack of printouts on the central conference table. More inquiries from the preliminary website launch. It's overwhelming, truly. So many narratives, so much suffering. Margaret looked up, her gaze softening. That's precisely why we're here, Eleanor. To be that beacon. She slid a thick file toward Eleanor. I've flagged a few that appear particularly egregious and align with our immediate action criteria. The first involves a Mrs. Davies, whose daughter, a supposed home health aide, convinced her of a need for experimental gene therapy for chronic fatigue. The woman's life savings were drained before the daughter vanished. Eleanor picked up the file, the details unsettlingly familiar. Another daughter preying on her mother. The pattern is disturbingly consistent. Dr. Thorne pushed back from his laptop, his expression grim. And medical establishments are woefully unprepared to detect it. Documentation is frequently fabricated, symptoms exaggerated, and the emotional manipulation, it's a masterclass in deception. Their initial focus had been restitution and legal recourse, but as the caseload swelled, Eleanor sensed a shift in their mission. Addressing only the aftermath felt insufficient, preventing the initial harm became paramount. "We need to broaden our scope," she declared, pacing the small room. "Beyond individual cases. How do we dismantle the system that allows this to flourish?" Margaret raised an eyebrow. "That's a colossal undertaking, Eleanor. Where would we even begin?" "Education," Eleanor replied, a spark igniting in her eyes. "For patients, for families, for healthcare providers. We must empower people to recognize warning signs, to question, to seek second opinions. And for providers, we need to advocate for rigorous oversight, improved reporting mechanisms, and true accountability." Dr. Thorne nodded slowly. "It's a long game, but an essential one. I've been researching legislative avenues. There's a proposed bill in the state legislature addressing elder abuse in healthcare settings. It's stalled, but we could lend our voice, our expertise." The prospect of tackling legislative reform felt daunting, but Eleanor recognized it as the natural evolution of their work. While individual cases offered justice to a few, systemic change could shield countless others. "Let's draft a letter of support," she decided. "And we need to begin organizing community outreach. Workshops on identifying fraud, understanding insurance intricacies, the critical role of trusted caregivers." Margaret, ever pragmatic, produced her planner. "Logistics, then. A larger venue for workshops will be necessary. And materials, brochures, presentation slides. I can begin compiling a resource list." The room crackled with renewed purpose. While the shadow of Sarah's action still lingered, it no longer paralyzed Eleanor. Instead, it fueled her. This nascent organization, this mission, offered a path to reclaim control, transforming personal devastation into a force for good. Weeks later, Eleanor stood before a small, apprehensive audience in a community center auditorium. The room was sparsely filled, predominantly with elderly individuals and their concerned family members. The air hung heavy with unspoken anxieties, a shared vulnerability. "My name is Eleanor Vance," she began, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. "And I understand what many of you are experiencing. I've witnessed firsthand the devastating betrayal of medical fraud, perpetrated by someone I loved and trusted." She paused, allowing the raw honesty of her confession to resonate. "It's a lonely place, feeling violated and confused. But you are not alone. The beacon of justice is here to help." She meticulously explained the nuances of medical fraud, the subtle manipulations, the red flags, and the preventative steps to take if one suspected victimhood. Dr. Thorne followed, demystifying medical jargon, while Margaret offered crucial legal insights. During the Q&A, a small, frail woman with tear-filled eyes raised her hand. "My grandson, he said I needed a special immune booster. It cost so much." Eleanor's heart ached. This was their reason for being. This was her purpose. Later, as they packed up, a young woman approached Eleanor. "My mother, she's in a nursing home. I worry about the bills, the treatments they say she needs. I just don't know who to trust anymore." Eleanor met her gaze, a profound empathy passing between them. "Start with us," she said gently, handing her a brochure with the Beacon of Justice's contact information. "We'll help you navigate it. We'll help you find your way through the darkness." The path ahead was long, fraught with challenges and painful echoes. But as Eleanor looked at the brochure in her hand, at the lighthouse logo symbolizing their mission, she knew she was precisely where she needed to be. Sarah's personal tragedy had irrevocably altered her, transforming her into an advocate for all those lost at sea, seeking safe harbor. The fight for justice, it turned out, was a marathon, not a sprint, and Eleanor was prepared for the long haul.